Good day, and welcome to my channel, Ken's Hobby. Today, I'm continue. I'm going to try to make this in a two-part, but if it depends how it goes, might be a third part to it. Pretty much, topic of this one will be my mid-years. First of all, I'm going to begin with a couple of things I forgot to mention in part one. Before I got in with more electric, I was underage at the time when there was pretty much, and I believe it still applies to this day, about age restriction as to when you're really entitled to the work field. My time, I was still a teenager, and my neighbor was a foreman for a roofing outfit called Northern Roofing. It was a German axe from Germany originally, and he had this roofing job. He come over to me and asked me if I wanted to go woofing in the morning. Well, I've always kind of kept that as a comical remembrance, not only of John Keeson, which was his name, but that was my first job, was roofing, thanks to John Keeson. Then I had another one in between that, which I thought I'd give a try. It was just shortly after I completed my school, before I went to Burnaby for my appliance servicing course. Was with Pacific Great Eastern Railway as a section. Later PGE became known as BCR, British Columbia Railway. It was a provincially owned railway. I think it was the 70s, when the NDP power came into power in the province of British Columbia, they promised that they would never sell BC Railway. And what did they turn around and doing? Despite their promise, turned around and sold BC Railroad. CN Rail now owns BCR Rail. Now CN Rail. That's the first thing that turned me right against politics and proved to me the biggest liar is the one that gets in always. And the reason I don't vote anymore. Not only that, we have to vote them in. Yet, if we have a complaint, our complaint is file 13. That's my trust for the government politics. So don't get me involved with politics. Anyhow, to finish off, a couple of other places I did go and manage to be involved with on the training on the job program was Talisman Appliance. And when I was taking the course in Burnaby in 1966 to 67 era, we had a 1-week session where we were placed with an outfit in the Lower Mainland. I managed to be placed with General Electric out of Vancouver. After that, came back from Vancouver, or Burnaby I should say. The course the vocational school was in Burnaby, BC. Came back from Burnaby, BC. The course got back on with Moore Electric until Bud Moore was selling out Moore Electric. Then a layoff took place, so I went from there to PG Electric. Prince George Electric it was called, and the boss's name was Ross Goodwin, if I remember right. That was when I found out that I had to have my own car. My very first car I did purchase when I was in my course down in the coast. It was a 1957 Pontiac. I sold that car before coming back to Prince George. So anyway, when I got back to Prince George and I got this job with Prince George Electric, I needed a car. So I started out hunting for a car. This took place between 1968 and 1969. So in 1969, I bought my very first brand new vehicle. Now, get this. It was a Toyota Corolla. I paid $2,000 for it, on the road, licensed and insured. Look at what a Toyota Corolla costs today for a new one. Yep. Well, another day. Trying to remember where I left off at. It's kind of chilly today. As you can see, I got my old Matt's Off-Road Recovery hoodie that I got. Plus Derek's bicycle garage cap there. Looks like it's almost too much light for the old emblem here. There we go. Now you can see VGG. Anyhow, where was I? I'll look at my notes here. Harder than I figured it would be, because you gotta pause, stop, look at your note, piece it together to get it all in the correct order. Not as easy as I thought it would. Anyhow, I've been writing things down here, and that's why I'm my reference list has to put things in perspective. I think I left off either it was at Moore Electric or at Prince George Electric when my next major step took place. It was at Prince George Electric, right. Prince George Electric is where I was when my next major step took place. That was the involvement of having to have a vehicle. Yeah, right. Let me think now. Yeah, okay. Thanks to John Keeson, that was my very first job. And that was a hot job too. It was the old tar and gravel. The other job that I had prior to Moore Appliance was my school buddy at the time. His name was Bill Plute. He was working for, at that time it was called PGE Railway, which stood for Pacific Great Eastern. We used to always tease it Prince George eventually, because it was a young line that was being built in to go from North Vancouver. The plan was to go to Fort St. John, north of Prince George, and it was quite a few years in the construction to get it to Prince George. Thus the name, the teasing name of Prince George eventually. Anyhow, I was a section man there with them. By this time I was of legal age, just became of legal age when I had that job. As a section man, that was a very, very hard job, as I found out. It sounded good and all easy. It wasn't, believe me. I couldn't handle it, so I didn't stay very long on it because I just didn't have the strength for railway ties and, what do you call those, railway ties. And the tamping that took place in the days long before they got the modern equipment they have today. It was all by hand, tamping the ties. So, let's start and pick up from here, from Prince George Electric and the event, major event that took place with me back at Prince George Electric when I was there. Because I needed a vehicle for that job so I could do service calls, they didn't have a vehicle to supply. You had to supply your own vehicle. Thus, the need for a vehicle. Because I didn't have one, a fellow co-worker by the name of Jim, I cannot remember his last name, but I do remember he had 2 vehicles at the time, and he said, well, I got a spare vehicle. I can borrow it until I get my own vehicle. Well, that's great. Sure, I'll go for it. Well, turns out, who cares what kind of a vehicle it was? You're going to laugh. It was a Volkswagen Beetle. We all call the Bug. But how many of us got our driver's license on those Volkswagen Bugs, Beetles? That's back in the 60s. I can tell quite a few stories. One of my friends here recently, he told me that's how he got his Class 1 driver's license. Little utility trailer on the back of his Volkswagen Beetle. Took his road test and passed it for a Class 1 as a tractor trailer. I still laugh at that to this day. Anyhow, he lent me this Volkswagen while I was hunting for a vehicle of my own. Thus, my very first brand new vehicle. My parents lent me the money to purchase this vehicle. I had, I think it was $2,300 in total in cash in my hand. How many out there today can say they can buy a new vehicle and pay cash for it? Yep. I doubt very, very, very few. Can't recall if I mentioned it or not, but I'll say it again. I paid $2,000 for this Toyota Corolla. The only option back in 1969 on a Toyota was the radio. Well, I wanted a radio, and I insisted I want a radio or no deal. He kept saying, "No, can't make a deal, can't make a deal." I said, "Well, fine. I'll go get my Datsun 510. That was the second choice vehicle I was looking at. The third one was an Acadian by General Motors. But as I was saying, well, I'll go get my 510 Datsun then. I just walked out of the room, and I just opened the car door, and I was about to get in this Volkswagen when he says, "All right, you got a deal." Because when I said I was paying cash for it, boy, that changes a salesman's mind very quickly. They don't want to lose a sale when you got the cash. So I got the Toyota. That was one tough little car. More on that later. Okay, we're at the Toyota. Now, let's see. Back to my notes. One more note, too, here. Well, as a Prince George Electric. It was the first one in the field where refrigeration took place. Well, Ross had a whole pile of old fridges he wanted redone. Well, that's when I found out how slow and time-consuming refrigeration took place. So I didn't do very many fridges in that era, because that was also a learning curve for me, because more appliance, which is called today, and I keep going to say that when it was still more electric, didn't do refrigeration. That was one thing. But didn't know about the Freon 12 at that time, today called CFC 134. My time it was all R12 and R22 for the commercial. The other, with the fact, like I say, time consuming on refrigeration, well, I kind of lost interest in there. Well, that's too time, you can't get the work done that I'd like to get done. So I kept putting the fridges off and deep freezers while focusing more on the washers and dryer ranges. Finally, I got laid off there, and that's when the next major step took place after that. The place where I bought my Toyota Corolla from was, the dealership was then known as Jado Motor. When it come to the first service job, the 1,000-mile service check, and I took it there, I got real close, right off the bat, like that. Became friends with a fella by the name of Joe Frickberg. Between the 1,000-mile service and its next due service, it was the day before this 1,000-mile service, you come to think of it. That's right, too. When I got the car, I said to the salesman at the time that I will personally install the radio, because at that time the radio was $90 extra. Of course, I got in the deal, but I said I would install the radio myself. That's when I met Joe Frick. When I went to pick the radio up at Jado Motors, the shop was located on Central Street here in Prince George. More on that later. Picked up the radio, and Joe offered me the shop to install the radio there at the shop. So I took him up on the offer. I installed the radio there. Well, he come and says, "Boy, you beat me in putting them radios in, and I'm not good at electrical to begin with." He says, "Would you be interested in a mechanic career?" Well, I thought about it. Got my interest there. We got mechanical with all our washers. Each and every washer that's out there, no matter what brand, has got mechanical to it, with transmissions, etc. in there, motors, transmissions. You're working with mechanical, so yeah, I'm kind of interested. Just as well, I'll talk to the boss about it and I'll let you know. I said, okay. So I went back about a week later, I think it was about a week later, and that's when I found out Jado Motors had sold the franchise and it became Northern Toyota Center. It was two brothers that purchased Jado Motor. Their names was Ken and Ernie LeBeau. Ken was the big goncho, as I found out in years to past. Ken owned this much of Northern Toyota. Ernie owned that much of Northern Toyota. Ken agreed to sign up me on apprenticeship for automotive mechanic. So thus began my automotive auto mechanics trade, signing up for a 4-year apprenticeship program. Because the vocational school here in Prince George didn't have any facilities and most other trades, it was all out of town. So it was location was either Kelowna or Burnaby, BC, with the British Columbia Vocational School. A little bit about that too later, and history comes in. This is why I'm bringing these up, because these two places have a little history behind them. That being said, let's go back to Northern Toyota. The place they had for the shop was originally called Central BC Motors. It was a one-bay shop with one hoist. Now, the ironic part about Central BC Motors is two things. Number one, they were the Austin Mini Cooper. Those of you who remember the Austin Mini Coopers and the Cooper S's. Yeah, that was the dealership then. Well, they went belly up and or never made a 6. I don't remember either which one to be exact. So we'll just leave it at that. They ended up closing down, and the building became Northern Toyota's building. The address I still remember to this day because it's still in use to this day, 1701 Central Street. Northern Toyota was building a new building at the corner of 20th and Redwoods, 1 block over where I'm presently living. When they moved, I was very much part of that move from Central Street to Redwood Street. What ended up with that building was it was torn down, and that was our first location for Canadian Tire. Thus, Canadian Tire built a whole new big building. As years went by, Canadian Tire expanded up in College Heights, built a brand new building, apparently the largest in Western Canada, thus shutting the old one on Central Street down. The college had to grow here, so they ended up taking over the old Canadian Tire building. So now it is part of the college here in Prince George. All of them had the same address and kept the same address of 1701 Central. Another piece of history for Prince George. The interesting part there, as I said, I had to go to British Columbia Vocational School in Burnaby. It was located on Willingdon, right next door to another institution called British Columbia Institute of Technology. As years have gone by, BCIT eventually took over BCVS, so it's now all BCIT. Piece of history again for the province. Anyhow, let's get back to my story. Well, that's part of my story, but some history. Okay, while I was at Northern Toyota, I'm trying to recall whether it was 2 or 3 times during its growth that it had to add on, making it larger and bigger. The first phase was the shop itself. We started out with a 4-bay garage. It was extended going south. So what Ken did, all the older houses in the block of Redwood between 20th Avenue and what would be 21st Avenue, bought the entire block out. And thus, the first phase started of building a bigger shop. What Ken did, And by the way, he hired 2 more mechanics in that era at the same time. One mechanic was an older fellow by the name of Ed. I can't remember his last name. And one of the relatives of Ken Levos was a fellow by the name of Hubert Nesty. Hubert, I don't recall whether he was licensed at the time or he was also an apprentice. But in any which case, we used to alternate on Saturdays, so we'd switch there. But what Ken did with us, and there was 4 mechanics at the time for this new shop, had a meeting with all the mechanics and asked us all to write down what we wanted or needed for this new shop. One of our recommendations to Ken was each one an individual hoist. Ken did that. Joe come up, he said it'd be nice if we had a hoist where when you go to pull a transmission out and doing a clutch job or something, you got that bar right there and you're trying to pull that tranny out. You can't drop it because of the bar of the hoist. So Ken got a hoist that was shaped. This was air over hydraulic at this time, long before electric hoists came out. But it was a hoist in that kind of a shape. So now the center was open so you could drop your tranny in between there and doing a clutch job. That was the shape of the hoist. I was with Northern Toyota for 3 full consecutive years. When Joe left Northern Toyota, he wanted me to follow him to the Renault dealership in town here, which is called Trojan Motor. I thought about this for a couple of weeks, and I thought, if I'm going to learn to be a mechanic, it's good experience. I learn all vehicles, not just Toyotas. Thus, I left Northern Toyota and went to Trojan Car Sales to work with Joe at Trojan Car Sales. That's when I first found out about the R8 Clack-O-Matic. Well, the first time I heard the term Clack-O-Matic. What the hell is a Clack-O-Matic? And I'll bet you a few of you are probably wondering questioning the same thing now. When I say Clack-O-Matic, what the heck is that? I'll tell you what it is. It was a R8 small car, but the way the transmission worked, it was a manual transmission, just like if you'd be shifting into your first, your second, or your third gear with your hand. But instead of you shifting it, it had solenoids, electric solenoids, that would do the shifting for you. Thus the name Clack-O-Matic, because when you'd hear these solenoids clicking in, you'd hear them changing the gears. So thus the name Clack-O-Matic. Okay, from Trojan Car Sales, I could never beat the flat rate times on those stupid Renaults, so I was let go. So then I went to a place called, I'll look at my notes here again, make sure I get this right. And like I was saying, when getting my experience to work on more than just Toyotas, after I left Trojan Car Sales, I went to a place called Foreign Car Center. Now, Foreign Car Center did pretty well all foreign vehicles. The biggest was, of course, Volkswagen. The buses on all the models of Volkswagen, but not just Volkswagens. They did the Fiat, Mercedes, Triumph, pretty well all the foreign cars. Thus the name Foreign Car Center. The owner of that place, his name was Klaus. I can't remember his last. He was also a German fellow. Good golly. Just look down at the time here and I can see a third part coming up here. Anyway, after I left Foreign Car Center is when I moved to Imperial Oil. Imperial Oil had a station downtown, was the Esso station, but it was the actual center was called Imperial Center because it was run by Imperial Oil. The number was 450, station number 450. I was not only the mechanic there, general mechanic, I also ended up being a front-end alignment man, and during my time advanced to being the service writer. At this point, when I was at Imperial Center, I was there till, well, it was 1974, because I was there, still there, when I finally finished my last year of apprenticeship and I was there when I got my interprovincial automotive mechanical certificate, thus making me a fully qualified mechanic, licensed mechanic. Of course, this was 1974. Things started happening in several directions at that point in my life. Number one, I got met up with this girl. Well, we actually grew up together, practically grew up together, but my childhood sweetheart. We ended up dating quite often. I'm not going to get into the story on that one because it has a lot of history behind it and events that did take place from earlier dating with her. And it was when I was at Imperial Center that things started getting serious between her and I. And also, I think it was 1975. Yeah, 1975, almost a year later. Joe Frickberg wanted me to come partnership in a station downtown, again here in downtown Prince George. That was Kitty Corner, the Esso station. It was a Husky station. I thought about it for a couple of weeks. I thought, that could be a good move because this way it's not I'm just a chance to learn my own business. So I took up the offer and moved from Imperial Oil or Esso, whichever you want to call it, to 10th and Victoria Husky. That's simply all it was called, 10th and Victoria Husky. Joe and I we specialized in what we called super tuning. One of our best customers, and I still laugh about it to this day, was the pollution control branch itself. They were our number one customer. There's a few stories I could tell there, but I'm not going to here at this point. I might come up with one or two down the line. Anyhow, I'm looking up my list here, and other major, like I mentioned, major things took place here after 1975. So these pretty well much wraps up my mid-year. That being said, I'm going to make this a 3-part series because everything I've written down here, I can see the necessity, and I'm trying to keep these videos down as short as possible for each one so it doesn't get overly boring, and I don't want an hour episode out of it. So this will finish and conclude my mid-years. I thank you for watching. Please subscribe, do like, share. I love to tell my story, and if I can even help one person with a tip or two of things that I have done or of the old school ways, that'd make my day. So we'll catch you on the next one.